You're staring into the glowing eyes of a gigantic goblin robot in the middle of the Boss Brawl arena. And suddenly you think, what am I doing here? This isn't like any other event. There aren't endless waves of horde. Just one boss standing between you and incredible rewards, like the big game hunter and hero shards for your favorite heroes. And while the whales might rule the top of the league, you can still climb the leaderboards by playing smarter. The key? Damage multipliers on a single target, stacking status effects, and using strategic deaths to revive when the boss is vulnerable. Today, I'll show you the best weapons, heroes, pets, and gear to maximize your damage and get to the top of the pedestal in Boss Brawl. In Boss Brawl, you have 3 minutes to run around and hit one of 4 bosses for as much damage as you can. The player who does the most damage to the boss over the course of the entire week in all of their runs wins. The boss will chase you around the battlefield. Your objective is to dodge all of the obstacles like whirling blades and spikes of doom, while continuing to damage the boss as much as you can. There are 4 unique bosses. Each one has a different set of abilities that will either stop you from doing damage or generally make your life annoying. Your goal is to thread through all of those different annoying aspects and attack the boss for as much damage as you can. And as long as you avoid an untimely death, you'll get the following rewards. Participation rewards for every 2 runs in Boss Brawl, which you can do each day via the standard ticket refresh and then claiming a ticket in the exchange. And then number 2, the chance to win exchange tokens based on how well you do across the week. The more damage, the better the rewards, and the higher league you'll get promoted to, up to a cap of League 8. But how do you do all that damage in order to get promoted? Well, to me, the most interesting part of Boss Brawl are the different weapons you build compared to the rest of the game. While most builds focus on AoE damage to hit horde from any direction, in Boss Brawl you want single target damage. To do that, you first need to stack status multipliers. Remember all those green talents in the talent section that seem ho-hum when you get them? Well, they are core to Boss Brawl. Each one of those talents offers multiplicative damage based on certain debuffs, such as burning, slow, poison, frozen, or stunned. Outside of Revive Rage, you can't really stun or freeze a boss, and so you're going to be focusing on applying those other statuses as quick as you can. And while the status multipliers are the main talents that you're focusing on, there is one other talent to know about. In the epic talent section, there's a talent that allows you to do more damage based on the lower percentage of health that you have. With that in mind, particularly during revive rages or vulnerability parts against the boss, you actually want to try and take a little bit of damage to lower your percent health, because that will increase the amount of damage that you do. However, you can't do any DPS if you're dead, so you have to thread the needle between having a low percentage of health but still not dying. Bosses go through a cycle of invulnerability and then vulnerability. When they're invulnerable, you can't hurt them, and when they're vulnerable, you do extra damage. Therefore, you want to time your one free death during a run to come right before the vulnerability phase. That means you're actively trying to die right before it. After you die, you come back with Revive Rage, which does 2 things. 1, it freezes the boss, so you get that additional status multiplier we talked about. And then 2, it gives you revive, so you just do a ton of damage. You want to save this revive for as late in the run as possible and time it with the last vulnerability phase. You want to save it for the end of the run because at that point all of your weapons will have been built up to higher levels. A well-timed death at the end of a run can literally double or triple your damage for the entire thing. And to further increase that damage, you can use one of the featured heroes or the featured faction. Every Boss Brawl session features 2 featured heroes and 1 featured faction. The heroes in that faction do additional damage, and the featured heroes can do even more damage. And those effects can stack. So if the featured hero is in the featured faction, they end up doing 2.5 times as much damage. Unfortunately, the featured hero can be one that you don't own, both within the faction or just generally. But because the faction is so important, you do want to check your faction camp and make sure that you have all of those settings set up to optimize for damage. Things like Warrior Guild have a lot of defensive abilities in their faction, so just make sure that you switch over to damage. Now on to the best heroes. The best heroes in Boss Brawl are the ones that bring their own status effect multipliers or single target damage. Heroes like Assassin and Warlord have bleed status built into their kit, which can offer additional damage to a single target. Additionally, auto aimers, those heroes that automatically face towards the boss, make it easier to do damage as you run around. With manual aimers, you're going to need to orb walk, which makes it a little bit harder. Orb walking is a concept from other video games, where after you make an attack animation you have to move, and then when your next attack comes up you have to turn around to attack before you move again. And you repeat that process to maximize your damage to the boss. With that in mind, some of the best heroes for Boss Brawl include Artificer, Oracle, Warlord, Assassin, Druid, Clockwork Mage, Big Game Hunter, and Monk. The sleeper heroes at the moment include Bunny, Crazy Tinkerer, Sentry Specialist with the Forge, Pumpkin Shade, and Crystalmancer. But generally, what you're looking for in your hero pool is to look for any of the heroes that meet these criteria. Number 1 are newer heroes. They get massive damage to their skills via increased hero star levels. Number 2, for those heroes, having them at star level 3 will dramatically increase your damage. And number 3, having any hero with a 4-star forge or a 5-star forge for their weapon. As an example, Crystalmancer meets both number 1 and number 2, and she's also an auto-aimer, but unfortunately doesn't have a forge, so there's always trade-offs. It's important to note that these types of heroes might actually do considerably more damage than the actual faction heroes for that week, so don't be afraid to play heroes outside of the featured faction. And I'll do my best to keep the written version of this updated with the best heroes for Boss Brawl as we continue to discover new ones or new ones are released. And now that we know the best heroes, we can gear them up with the best weapons in the middle of the run. There are going to be 2 weapon builds in Boss Brawl that maximize the number of status effect multipliers you get as quickly as you can. The first is what I call Coles' Boss Brawl base build, and I named this one after me because I'm the first one to write it down. This build assumes you only have access to the base weapons. Furthermore, it gets a little stronger if you have Arcane Staff 4-starred or all of your base weapons at 2-star forge, but that's not required. The weapon priority is 1 point in poison darts, which will get you the poison multiplier. Next, you want to get your second weapon that applies burning, and so I use Arcane Staff for that. But what also could work is crossbows at 2-star forge, chain lightning at 2-star forge, or even dragon's breath at 2-star forge. All of those will give you a burning multiplier. Your next priority is cooldown tome, followed by your main weapon, and then Arcane Staff, particularly if you have it at a 4-star forge, because at 4-star it'll also apply the slow debuff. And while some bosses are immune to slow, it's nice to have the additional multiplier. You follow that up with Chain Lightning, Crit Tome, Duplicator Tome, 1 point in Duration Tome in order to evolve Arcane Staff, and then either Bomb or Crossbow to finish out your build. Start using my build and you'll immediately see a big increase in damage. And you don't have to take my word for it. I gave this build to DM95 in Discord and he immediately had great results. One thing to note is that you only get to evolve about 3 weapons during a run. So that means you're looking to evolve your main weapon, Arcane Staff, and then maybe something like Chain Lightning. The other 2 weapons you really only want to put 1 point into, because you're not going to be able to evolve them. After you evolve your 3 main weapons, then you start maximizing tomes. But remember, only use this build if you're limited to the base weapon set. The way you challenge the whales, or even become one of them, is using special weapons. Which takes me to Wave's wonderful all-weapon build. Wave is currently one of the top 10 players of the game, and has been playing for a lot longer than I have. This is the build that he's optimized for damage in Boss Brawl. And before I jump right into it, I will note that if you have Mighty Borer, that is probably the single best weapon in Boss Brawl. So if you have it, replace the last weapon in the previous build I was talking about, put in Mighty Borer, and actually evolve it second after your main weapon. That'll give you the most damage. Okay, back to Wave's wonderful all-weapon build. This build assumes you have access to basically all of the special weapons, and they're all at least up to 4-star forge. So here's the build. First is Borer, which you're going to max after your main weapon. And then you have to pick one of 2. You pick Lotus Pike, which you take if you don't have a bleed effect in the hero's kit. The second is Pitchfork, which you take if the hero already has a bleed like Assassin or Warlord. You're then looking to stack status multipliers. For burning, you ideally want Dagger of Dawn, but 1 point in Arcane Staff can work. Next up, you need to apply Poison, so it's Poison Darts. And last, you want 1 point in Slingshot for Expose, unless your hero has it in that kit. That makes the level up priority CD Tome, followed by the main weapon, Borer, and then either Pitchfork or Lotus, followed by all the tomes. And again, you're looking to stack all the status multipliers, so if your hero already has a burn, something like Tinkerer, you can skip Dagger of Dawn or Arcane Staff for a stronger weapon that you have. There's more detail here in the written guide that goes over the forge choices and different strategies, but I'll leave that for there, because now we're going to move over to jewels. On the jewel side, there are a few different considerations. The first is that you're only going to be facing one target, and unless your ultimate can proc off of just applying something to a target, you're not going to be able to cast it. Therefore, you don't need ultimate charge and ultimate duration jewels, unless you have a hero that can proc their ultimate like Clockwork Mage. Next, you're still going for 90% total cooldown after the cooldown tome, so you want 60% in the detail screen. And lastly, because you have to orb walk and move around a lot in Boss Brawl, it can be beneficial to put in 1 or 2 high-level movement jewels, just so that you can kite more efficiently. With that in mind, the priority jewel build is Vulnerability, and then ultimate jewels for basically like Clockwork Mage and a couple others. Cooldown to 60%, movement speed, projectile P, projectile M, and then critical strike. You favor critical strike instead of AoE in Boss Brawl because you're only attacking one target. And I personally always use a movement speed jewel, particularly for heroes like Bunny and Monk, where you need to run around a lot and turn around, and in Bunny's case he's just really slow. Now on to gear. For gear, You're looking at a rogue helm, a rogue chest, rogue gloves, and a rogue necklace, but with wizard boots and a wizard ring. You run Ascended Wizard Boots because that way, all of the experience orbs in the run will come towards you and you don't have to spend time running around. If you don't have Ascended Wizard Boots, you can just run standard Ranger Boots. Furthermore, you use Wizard Ring, especially at Ascended Plus, because of the damage multiplier to frozen enemies. I know the boss only gets frozen during Revive Rage, but that's the most important time of the run, and that damage multiplier in Wizard Ring makes that one part of the run worth it, also for the status effect duration increase, meaning the boss is frozen longer. Those are one of the small optimizations that Wave gave me in this build. And of course, if you're early in the game, don't worry about having the optimal build, just run your highest tier gear available to you at the time. And now I'm briefly going to cover pets. Pets don't actually do that much damage in Boss Brawl. They shine when they can do AoE, particularly when they're crowded by horde in something like Nightmare Mode. But in Boss Brawl, and it's a single target, your pet actually doesn't do all that much damage. So with that in mind, I typically suggest running your highest rarity pet with your two best passives. There might be a small optimization in using Earth Striker as your passive pet for the status effect application, or one of the other elementals for those status effect applications if you don't have them in your build. But that's typically only very early in the game. And now that we have everything prepped and ready, we can go over what you'll actually win from putting all this effort into Boss Brawl. I love the new reward system in Boss Brawl. It starts with two basic concepts. The first is participation rewards. Every 2 runs that you do, you get additional runestones and hero orbs. After that, if you finish high enough up in the league, you get exchange tokens that's used in the shop over time. And the participation rewards are nothing to sneeze at. Over the course of 5 days, if you do all 10 runs, 50 runestones seems small, but that's 2.5 portal chances, which can net you additional hero shards or even more hero orbs. And then there's the obvious exchange rewards. The big game hunter is the big one here. For 100,000 tokens, you get access to that hero. And unlike something like Hero Clash, Big Game Hunter is great, and he's actually super strong in Boss Brawl, so it's worth saving up all your tokens to get him. After that, they've very fairly priced hero shards at 4,800 tokens per 20 hero shards. This will let you get your favorite hero up to 3-star or 4-star way faster than otherwise. So the exchange in Boss Brawl is one of the best ways to star up your heroes and make your whole account stronger over time. And there you have it, Cole's guide to Boss Brawl. The keys are to load up on damage multipliers, practice your kiting, and maximize your damage with optimal revive rages. In my opinion, Boss Brawl is one of the best aspects of Heroes vs Hordes. It's all about planning ahead of time and then stepping in and being able to execute during a limited time period. If you execute well, you move up in the leagues in no time and gain access to really quality rewards. I am a big fan of the updated Boss Brawl and think this is one of the best events in the game. And I'm Coles, I'm a high level HVH player. Please like this video if you liked it, or subscribe to my Patreon. This video is executive produced by Cake Invictus. You can sign up too to become an executive producer. Let me know if you have any questions here, on Discord, or on Reddit. And remember, always do your adventures!